Everybody, welcome to the Evoke Bike and Shot Performance Endurance Podcast. My name is Brendan Hausler. I'm the co-founder and president of Evoke Bike. You may have seen us on YouTube or we run a daily podcast. I'm a three-time Masters national champion, but still kicking it in the P1 races. And I will actually be racing next year with this guy. And I am super excited to be with Owen Schott. Owen, what's up, man? Tell the people who you are, and we'll get this podcast rolling.
Yeah. So I'm Owen Schott, Jacksonville, Florida native at this point. Also a three-time national champion, like Brendan. So I think we're going to call this podcast, the podcast of champions or something like that. But yeah, super pumped. I started my own coaching business back in, I believe, 2011 now. Shot performance coaching. I work with any type of endurance athlete. I've got everything from people doing the obstacle course events and triathlon runners, and that's where I kind of started, was a runner, and then worked my way into cycling, and I love it. It really is like, oh man, I'm kind of good at this, so I better keep going.
That actually pairs really well with the topic of endurance and aerobic performance. You're just an aerobic beast, so you find your way through all these different sports. And you runners that come over to cycling, it's just super strong. It's if you've got that big engine running on the road, there's some good translation for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And so that, I guess when I reached out to you, that was kind of the thing, was like, for me, I think endurance is such a, like, what is the word? What does it cover? Like, the language is so different. And, I deal with three different sports. And so, it's like, really, like, the vocabulary is different when you say endurance, to a runner or to a triathlete, and then vice versa to a cyclist. And so, I was like, man, I really want to talk about this and kind of explain how important for me. I want to be like, how important is this? Am I just throwing this out here and going, man, I'm overemphasizing how important, like, endurance aerobic side of this is, or, so I was like, well, I think, let me talk to another national champion that does work with other athletes and get his intake on it and see what your thoughts are.
Well, it's actually very interesting that you asked that question because for me, endurance is the only reason I'm here. It's the only reason I'm still relevant going on the age of 40. You are over 40 and still smashing. And at the same time, the number one workout that is mailed in by athletes is the endurance ride. They see 2 hours of pretty steady power band and I don't have to do that one, or I'm going to turn it up on that one. It gets the least respect, and it really only gets respect when it's longer, when an athlete knows, okay, 4 hours, 5 hours, that's going to be difficult. But just that goes along with the mindset then of, well, if I only do 2 hours endurance, I'm not really that tired. And you don't have to come home smashed from every workout. You don't want to come home smashed for every workout. So to answer your question right off the bat, endurance is the most important. It's a thing I work on all year round. It never changes. And just crossed 150,000 miles that I've logged. There's definitely another 7 to 10 out there that just never got on the computer, that I didn't have a power meter then. I didn't have, I think we all started back in the day. I had a cat eye and like a pen and paper and was like, I rode 22 miles today, my long ride. So that, yeah, it's huge, humongous.
Cool. And I guess I just wanted to,
what do you think?
reassure myself.
What do you think coming from, how is endurance looked at from, were you runner first or triathlete first?
Runner.
So how is it looked in the running and triathlon community? And I think part two of that question would be, how do triathletes think about it, since they're thinking about it in three different ways: running, swimming, and cycling?
Yeah, that's super tricky. Like, triathletes are oh man, it's very complicated because you have so many moving pieces, and that could be a whole different podcast, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like the more when I became a cyclist and I really like started working with coaches like yourself and some of the other coaches I've had, I feel like I learned more as a running coach. Like it really helped me, I
Mm-hmm.
think, make my runners better. Because like it's easy to go out and ride and keep your heart rate, at 65% of max or 130 beats. And if like I told a runner to go out and, hey, I want you to stay at 130 beats, they're like, oh, I'm walking. I'm like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
walking. Most, half of them are. And but it's really interesting to see what happens when you do it, and then all of a sudden their pace would improve, right? But they're
That's
still at
interesting.
130 beats, right? And it's their first 2 weeks, they're like, they're moving around at like 11, 10-minute pace. And now I've got some athletes that, they can go out and run 8-minute miles and they're at 130 beats a minute. And it's like, all right, now,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden when they run 6-minute pace, it's not that bad. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, their heart rate's not through the ceiling or the sub threshold or whatever. So yeah, I think it's helped me. I think working with more cyclists has helped me as a running coach, because again, this could be a whole nother podcast, but like for runners, everything is like the matrix of a mile, right?
Mm.
And they want to know, everything's measured on how many miles did you run this week, how fast, per mile, what you're doing. And that's like, well, if I take somebody that's getting into it and somebody that's been in it, like you can't give them the same workout. You can't go out and, they want to say, oh yeah, I'm going to go out and do mile repeats. Well, that would be like me telling you to go out and do, mile repeats. It would make no sense to you as a
Mm-hmm.
cyclist.
Mm-hmm.
But for a
Yep.
runner, that's how they measure it, but I could have runners doing 8-minute miles and I could have runners doing 430s. As we know, like that's two different systems, right? If,
Right.
if you're going all out at 8 minutes or all out at 4 minutes, like you're really not touching the same thing as that much. So yeah, it's been pretty cool, because now like I'll give some of my runners, I'm like, yeah, I want you to go do 4 by 4 minutes, and they're like what? And I'm just like, all out as hard as you can, 4 by 4 minutes. Where did that come from? That came from the cycling world, like they
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so it's kind of neat, from a standpoint.
Definitely. So you had some questions that you were thinking of, and I know a couple that always get asked about from my standpoint. Let's start with yours and see where they go.
Well, yeah, I think the first thing, I really wanted to touch on is what is endurance training, or what is aerobic training? What's going on? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this is kind of the basics, but I think a lot of people, maybe don't get it. Like, and they're, like I have a lot of athletes, man. They want to keep pushing the ceiling up. They want to keep pushing the ceiling up, and maybe they don't understand what is actually happening, why we're doing all this aerobic work. And so I
Mm-hmm.
kind of, sat back and said, okay, what is like the cliff notes of it, right? We don't want to go super geeky into the science, but
Mm-hmm.
in a nutshell, right? Like we're working on like those type 1 muscle fibers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And creating a larger pump. And so there's a lot of different ways to go at it. The way I kind of talk to people about it is it's like building, like building these highways, and you got these dump trucks that can carry so much, and then they go to like these factories and they have to load and unload like really fast, right? And so I think that's like almost endurance training in a whole, is like, what is our body doing, right? Like what is actually happening. And so I kind of like come at it from that direction and go, okay, yeah, like, well, I want you to slow down, because I want to create these better highways for you, right? I
Mm-hmm.
want to create these larger pumps, so
I think you're hitting it on the head big time of I started riding and training in 2009, and I think until cycling podcasts came out, all I knew was it was just like you're saying, it was endurance. I didn't really know what that meant. I knew what it was. I knew, okay, by definition, it's exactly 55 to 75% FTP. Hey, maybe go easier if you're feeling a little tired. What's really happening? I was a fast cat athlete with Jason Hillmeyer. And so they had created a chart that I don't totally agree with. It was if you really look into it, some of the stuff, it seems a little based around sweet spot training. And maybe it's just because it's an older chart. But they did outline some things. And I think there's 6 really big points that we could touch on in 5 minutes without getting super granular that I think has helped clarify in my brain. So I'm going to rattle these off real quick. The first one is very easy to understand for everybody. If you ride endurance, it's proven through papers, you increase muscle glycogen storage. Simply said, if you can hold more glycogen, you're going to be able to have more energy in your muscles to pedal the bike later in the day. We all know that everybody's really strong in the first 45 minutes. People are pretty good for 2 hours. What happens after that? And so that's really more important for the gravel racer, for the P1, 2, 3 racer. Cat 4s and 5s, it's important to start developing that because it's not something that happens instantly over time.
And a good example of this is, I call it the kill shot, right? Go out, create 3,000 kilojoules, and then can you create a 1 minute or a 5 minute or a 20-minute effort, right? Like everybody's like, my numbers are these. Mm-hmm. But what you're pointing out is like, hey, can you be more efficient at the end? And like, yes. I don't know if you ever saw the analysis from my when I won in 2017 at Nationals. But for people who are watching, it came down to a 3-man breakaway, and it was me.
Do you have Brendan. A GoPro of this?
I don't have a GoPro of it, but I had somebody kind of do a power analyze of it.
Okay.
And yeah, it's really cool because basically what happened was, we were going all day long, right? This is just a hard battle. And vice versa. We can look at 2018. It'd be interesting to see when Brendan beat me. But the course, basically how it's set up is there was about a 1K, maybe a little less, 800-meter hill at the finish of this race.
50-second effort, isn't it? Up to the top to the finish line, I'd say.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
A little less, maybe?
Yeah, maybe a little longer.
Maybe a little longer, okay.
So, but, the first year, like Brendan attacked like 3K out, and luckily I had another guy with me, and he just pulled him right back and kind of gave me the free ride. And in a nutshell, we were 3 hours in, just tired, we were gassed, and I had the kill shot, right? I went, for me, almost 10 watts per kilo the last minute up this hill.
And I will say, sorry to interrupt you. I had a good viewpoint for the show, and you took off, and it was pretty instantly defeated. I stood up, and you were freaking gone. I was like, damn, that dude just won. Who's that guy?
Yeah, exactly. And then the following year, I was like, I'm going to do it again. And I went, and Brendan was ready this time, and he kind of countered it and went right by me. And that same thing, I was like, and like there was 3 of us or 4 of us again. And like, I didn't even want to fight for second because I really wanted first, and he went, and it was like, oh, okay.
All of my training went to that race. All of that was like, make sure you have something at hour 3.
Right.
Yeah.
And now, so long story short of what, the first thing Brendan's talking about is like, are you going to have that glycogen at the end for that kill shot, and obviously there was a lot of other factors, and parts of that was the anaerobic system. But I think, me having a super high aerobic base that year and being able to utilize fat as an energy source, allowed me to have that at the last minute there,
And that's actually, so that was my number 6 is actually riding in endurance will help athletes use fat more efficiently. My one big harp now, and I was so glad that Stephen Bassett brought this up when we did a podcast. I said, what's a big buzzword these days? And he said, fat adaptation, because we're talking and you hear a lot, use fat more as a fuel. 100% agree with that. But then athletes get into this keto thing. They get into, I'm only riding and I'm only going to get fat adapted and they forget about carbohydrates. And if you think that fat efficiency and only using fat are two very, 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 very different things. So anyone listening to this, I want to make sure you understand both of those winning moves are done off carbohydrates. There is physically no possible way for that type of effort to be done. So use fat more efficiently so you can use the carbohydrates. That's what Owen is saying. And it just, the water gets muddy there, and that can really wreck people's training.
Right. Agree 100%. Yeah.
You also mentioned efficiency. So that was my number 4. When we use these type 1 fibers that Owen's talking about on the more endurance side, as you do a longer ride, they get tired and they say, we need some help. Hey, type 2 fibers, you're usually more anaerobic. Get over here, do a little bit of work. So now your anaerobic fibers start to work more aerobically. And this is huge because you're going to be able to use oxygen more efficiently, which when you do that to create energy, you create less hydrogen ions, which are what provide that stinging, burning feeling that says, I think I'm going to lay off the gas a little bit. So the efficiency is huge for both of those.
And 2 examples on that, what you're saying is I had 2 athletes that I worked with, both really high-end athletes. I mean, state champions, the whole 9 yards. And we took a winter period of base training, right? And one gentleman, Will Jessup, I think he might have put in, I want to say it was about 2 hours and 20 minutes for 4 months. 2 hours and 20 minutes was in zones 5 and 6, so above threshold. And man, 90% of it was like zone 2 and zone 3, right? Just super aerobic. And we got done with that block, and we're heading into the year. And I said, hey, I want you to go do a 5-minute power test. And he's like, what? He's like, I haven't touched those systems, and I said, no, I just want you to go do a 5-minute power test, right? And long story short, he said his best 5-minute power ever, right? And it improved as the year went on, but it was just one of those cases. And I did it with another athlete, the previous year, and she same thing. She was like, I can't believe it, like the only time she really got high intensity stuff was on a Saturday group ride here and there, but yeah, so to kind of touch on what you're saying is it works,
More mitochondrial density. Your highway, that would be not the dump truck, but that would be wherever they're dumping. So we're doing those high intensity VO2s so that you get that cardiac output. And then I forget, I talked to Tom about this, my coach, and I'm trying to think where else I heard this first. But really, endurance, increase the density, the number of mitochondria, and those are the powerhouse of the cell creating the energy. So just like your highway example, that's huge. I think that is the most I shouldn't say misunderstood, just it's not talked about enough. If you had said to me 5 years ago when I was 7 or 8 years into training, hey, riding endurance improves your VO2 max, I would have been like, what? I didn't know the whole equation. And so I think, but meanwhile, I'm sitting here preaching base miles, ride endurance. I just didn't know that was a benefit of it. And so it's funny how, I'm glad that social media and these podcasts and just more information's out there. We're able to understand what we're doing in our bodies much more. And at the same time, we're still just barely scratching the surface, which is interesting. Lactate threshold, FTP. Yeah. You said push that window up. A lot of people use that as, I got to push up my ceiling. Sometimes people say aerobic ceiling when they're talking about FTP, which really is actually incorrect. Aerobic ceiling would be VO2 max, but we get the point. Riding endurance will help you clear lactate more efficiently. So what's your FTP? How much lactate do you produce minus how much can you clear? When that equation gets kind of wonky, you feel those hydrogen ions. You're like, oh man, I have to go sub FTP now to recover a little bit. So riding endurance will definitely help improve your FTP. And we could go down a wormhole off that. Like you had said, there's also this anaerobic contribution in those 1 minute efforts that we did. If you train that too much, that's when you're going to be undergoing glycolysis, using the carbs, which is a good thing. But if you do it too often and become more glycolytic, you produce more hydrogen. So technically get more strong anaerobically versus aerobically, and your FTP goes down. So that's a whole other. Yeah. It's all related, which is the fun thing, but the annoying thing. Like, I need more anaerobic power, but I might damage my FTP. I need more FTP. Now I'm not as sharp. Like this balancing of everything. I think what there's, and then even like one of the things that I learned from Jason was the more endurance you ride, he always like more capillaries in your muscles. So then there's more transport of oxygen, more efficient athlete. I think that's the, 3 times we've said efficiency, and that everything that counts cannot be counted. And efficiency is nothing that Training Peaks is not going to say, hey, you efficiently improved your capillarization today. When we can't see it, we see watts, we see a lower heart rate, those things that are more tangible metrics. And so it's really good. I mean, we've talked a lot. I always use your analogy when people say, Brendan, why do you have a coach? I said, my buddy Owen said it to me one time, a surgeon doesn't operate on himself, so why would I? And that's what I love about having a coach, is that they help you step away from the metrics sometimes. The numbers are great, but how's the athlete feeling? How do you subjectively feel? And those are so important. And it's these endurance rides. There's no PR. There's no fast time. There's kilojoules, and you just got to know you are putting power in the bank for later, but it just wasn't today. And so, well, do we miss anything there? Any big?
I think that's it. We can go into cardiovascular output and the stroke volume and the pump and the whole 9 yards. But I think
just saying that the pump is what the high. So if somebody said, well, why do I ever do 5x5s? Why do I ever go super hard? That's for the pump. That's your heart. That's pump out blood. Yeah. I think if somebody wants to go beyond that, they easily can. Like there's papers, blogs, whatever. But knowing more in that area it's not going to make you faster. Like that's the main, in my opinion. But some people want to know more. Google it. There's tons of information on it.
Right, for sure. So yeah, so I think we nailed some questions. So we kind of came up with this idea. It was like, I've got athletes that have been asking me questions, and I think vice versa. And so it was kind of just, like I wanted to get a different perspective on this stuff. And so I kind of came up with a couple questions for Brendan that, I have my thoughts and my opinion on, and just same thing, wanted to kind of almost get it reinforced. The first thing I wanted to talk about was cadence work. Okay. Do you prescribe, or do you address cadence type work during this block, or is it all the time? And this is we've heard big gear, high spin, whatever, right? Like, what's your kind of approach on that, and where do you go with it?
Yeah, so just so if there's newer listeners, if we say big gear or high torque, think of being in your big ring in the front and your little ring in the back, or a hard gear, a lower cadence. And then obviously a high cadence is going to be faster spinning, just so we're all on the same page. So I call it torque, like high torque intervals. I really don't do any high cadence. And this is purely, personally, I've done some before, and I actually used to ride a fixed gear all winter. And I had amazing leg speed coming out into spring. But if you don't keep doing it, your body naturally goes to what you naturally want to pedal. And there was definitely a cost to doing that. Like there were times when I'm on this fixie and it was just unbearable almost. Right. So if people are wondering why I rode a fixie, I was in the cold, the snow. The thought of riding a road bike outside was not feasible in the 2010, let's say. So anyways, I do assign high torque work. It's usually very, very early on. I'll be able to tell if an athlete, if it agrees with them or not. Some are like, that made my knee feel weird. We pretty much immediately stop it. Some people just, I don't know if it's their pedaling style, they're pushing weird, their bike setup, but if it's bothering them, it's not going to be worth it because that could create a major issue. Myself, I do enjoy doing it. I sort of self-assign it to myself at times. Tom doesn't really give it to me much. And I will do it if I'm doing like 4x10s. And sometimes if I'm just cranking up a hill, like a longer climb, or even I've done it on rollers. And when I do maybe only 2 to 3 sessions of that over, let's say, 14 to 20 days, when I'm riding around threshold or above, there's just seems it creates another gear. I can be riding and then I can shift into a harder gear and almost mash a little bit, but it no longer feels like mashing, and it sort of changes the muscles, how they're firing or something. And then I go back to normal cadence and it's sort of like I'm relieved. So for really long efforts, it helps with that. And then I guess behind the science aspect, the theory is because there's more torque, you could technically ride around 90 to 95% FTP and get the same physiological adaptations as if you were riding at 100% FTP. The only issue I have with that is it's not the same. It feels different. Your heart rate's lower. It can sometimes screw with an athlete because then when they are riding normally at 100% FTP, their heart rate's beating a little bit faster and they're not used to that thing almost coming out of their chest. And they're like really on the limit. And they're like, wait a minute, I'm used to doing, like they want the other scenario. So it depends on how much the athlete's riding. So I do assign it sometimes, but it's not for everybody. And sometimes I just experiment. I say, hey, have you ever done high torque work? No. You want to try it? This is kind of why we would do it. This is what I feel from it. And some people try and like, I actually love that. And I'm like, great, let's do it again. Other people, it seems to help them climb better. And at the other extreme, other people say, nope, hated that, don't want to do it. Great. There's a billion other things we can work on.
Right. No, that makes sense.
What's your thought on that?
This is awesome because
are you totally different?
Because I've had 2 different coaches. One that was a big a lot of high cadence work. Basically a progression. You start at X and then you work up to to Y. And then I had another coach, super big gear guy. Just hey, we're gonna start here and basically he set me at a heart rate. And we do these intervals and just see if the power improved based on that heart rate. And so, again, why do we have teachers? Why do we have coaches? I kind of just grabbed a bunch from both of them and just said, well, crap, why can't I just create something that's, I think it's super low picking fruit. And maybe, I wish there was more research on it to prove it. But I've just seen what my athletes are experiencing. And I'm like, all right, it's working, right? And is it? I don't know. Is it just because they're riding more?
Can I want to comment on that actually because I don't like I don't like taking things I talk from Tom with, and because I don't want to ever muddle his words. But we just talked about. I made the comment to him about somebody who was like, well, show me the study. And I'm like, man, there's not, some people out there think that there's a study for like every cycling interval, for every reason why we do things. And I made the comment to Tom in passing, said it's just people forget that there are so few studies that are real life when you don't get that many cyclists in a lab, and the way to truly analyze and follow them is not like a normal cycling, like a normal study in science. Sports science is really difficult because of that. So I think when you're saying your feedback from the athlete, do they feel faster? That's what matters. It's right. We might never find a study, or maybe because of Zwift, I think we'll find more studies. More people will be willing to ride in the lab because some people are just riding on Zwift exclusively anyway. So it's not a torture. It's just what they do. But I'm with you, man. And again, my way is not right. It's just high cadence never did it for me. Maybe I should start throwing to some people and be like, what do you think? But
Yeah. And
So yeah,
all I do is just a little bit of a progression, like literally I start my athlete, and you were talking about the knee stuff, and it was like, well, yeah, if you go out and give somebody 2 by 20 minutes and on big gear, like
yeah,
they're probably, not going to want to walk the next day. And so, it was just, again, worked with guys like Tom Danielson, and we always did high cadence, and it was just part of almost the warm up, right? It was like,
every ride.
you're talking about like you just, oh, I did it, and then I stopped doing it. And it is almost just part of the warm up process. And so, yeah, it was even just going, okay, I'm going to do 2 by 5 minutes at 110 RPMs at X%, and then I'm going to do 2 by 5 minutes at big gear or low RPMs, at X%, and just kind of added that in. And like for my athletes that are responding well, I just kind of add volume, time on it, and say, okay, well, next week we're going to do, 2 by 8 minutes, and then we're going to do 2 by 12, and kind of get them to a point where, the way I think about it is like, if you think about the pedal stroke, right? When you're like in a big gear or a mashing, torque position, you're going, you're using glutes, quads, and calves, right? You think about how the geometry of the body is. But
Hmm.
when you're on a high cadence, you're using that hip flexor, the hamstring, and then the shin muscles. So my thought process is we're stimulating these muscles that maybe you just don't really turn on all the time because you're doing your normal 80 to 90 RPMs, right? You just, hey,
Hmm.
these are the muscles that work, right? But like if we can turn them on a little bit more,
That's interesting, man. Because I've been
I challenge you. I'm going to put a challenge out to you.
I will accept that challenge. I'm actually going to throw it. No, I seriously, because I had to change.
God, I look at that as guys. I just lost nationals next year.
Man, it's gonna make me. Well, actually, you can't because now they're on the same squad. It's gonna be,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. Sorry.
um, one I've had last year. I had an issue with a hip flex. It was actually my QL apparently, but my hip flexor and my glute were bothering me because the QL was super inflamed, and I guess that's where it shows its issues. But being on these flatlands here in Florida for the months in the winter, I was nudging myself forward more. And I won't know the answer. I think I was just putting too much pressure on the hip flexor, but at the same time, maybe it was just the same pedaling over and over and over again. And so I've changed saddles, which has me in a little bit better position, I think, but I could be maybe benefiting from changing up the pedal stroke. So tomorrow, this might be. So do you do that for the whole endurance ride? Like, is this an endurance thing, or is this just the warm up and maybe during
So
cool down? And what do I have to do? I have to do 110 RPM. That already sounds pretty high.
I'll send you that. But yeah, no, like for the endurance phase or the winter training, I'll just make it's just a workout, right? It's a workout for
Hmm.
these athletes because it's like, how many times can you give them endurance ride? So it's like one of the days is just high low cadence, right? But then as we get into the season and like we need to start really working on other stuff, can become part of the warm up, right? So we're just still touching it, right? It's there, we're turning it back on, and then you're not forgetting it. So yeah, I'll shoot you something over and
Hit
just
me
say,
up,
hey, this
man.
is how what I think. It doesn't hurt to like, and then it's quick workout, right? And then you just go and ride, you go throw it at 70% and do the rest of your ride or 65, whatever, you know.
Yeah, that's actually my question. Do you ride at 65 or 75%? What is endurance? That's the number one endurance question that I get all the time. What do you ride at?
Man,
So,
and it's crazy because, when I worked with you, man, and this was probably that certain time of your life, right? We put it right at 75%, man, right? It was just like, and I was just flying everywhere, right? And I felt like I had some really good growth and improvement, like really fast, and it was just like, and everybody's like, dude, you just fly everywhere. And I'm like, man, let's put it at 75%. And it's like, in Florida, that's
fast.
moving. Yeah, you're running 23, 24 all the time. And so then I started working with another coach, and he didn't, he wanted me at 130 beats a minute, and I was just like, but it was crazy because when we started, it was 190 watts, and probably X amount of months, 2 or 3 months later, it was 230, 240 watts. So I saw a,
Huge.
huge gain on my lower end, fitness, or however you want to look at it, right? Like we could see, but if I was doing 75%, it'd be cool to look back at what we were doing and going, oh, did my heart rate shift down, but we were still holding 75%, probably.
I think because your FTP is so high, 75 is too hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would definitely go back, and the thing is too, the feeling. Did you feel like you were really great? Like I'm getting it today. If you're pushing that hard, it's probably too hard. And, I think that even the zones, WKO came out with eye levels to address part of this issue. But when we talk about percentages of FTP, 5% of my FTP is over 20 watts. So you change it. Oh, just 5%. Well, it's like, whoa, that's 22 something watts. Like that's a big difference.
Right.
So you're up there, and maybe it is more 65, 70, and look at whatever you can do around that heart rate. And people are probably croaking right now because I'm not a huge heart rate fan. I'm just like, put the watts out, but I'm more about the RPE. How does it feel? And
Right.
sort of taking that from our RPE lifting podcast, we did this guy, Matt Bickford, who had reached out to me on Strava, just being in the gym. This was only, I gotta remember when I started lifting. This might be my 4th year consistently. I'd lifted a bunch before, but just always stopped. And he just commented, man, it's interesting that you would recommend full out lifting. And I'm like, well, it's not really max all the time. And he's like, well, looks like some. And so we, hey, let's chat. And we did a podcast, and he's a strength coach in San Fran and all about RPE. And I was wondering how that worked. And then he explained it. And it was really, and so I started thinking more about riding. And then I haven't listened to it yet. It just came out the other day. Fast Labs with Velo News just put out, is RPE the best metric? So I'm curious what those guys had to say about it.
Yeah.
So in the Discord, which I was telling you about, you need to get in this. Some Andy, shout out to Andy, who had said somebody told him, don't chase endurance, just ride.
Okay.
Endurance.
Right, yeah.
And then I would add the caveat, try not to coast. And you don't have to, I was pretty dogmatic about it. And I had put out there the article that is 10% zone 1, just keep pedaling. Maybe that's definitely aggressive if you live in the mountains. You will kill yourself. It's probably, I should rewrite that. Most people do endurance rides for 2 to 3 hours. If it's that case, yes, you can no doubt just keep it at 10%. 10% for 4 to 5 hours is very, very tough. Maybe I'm just getting soft on myself, but I've backed off it a little bit. But at the same time, I also think that because sometimes I ride a little bit too much tempo, that I make it hard on myself to finish that. So again, it's balancing it. And another great reason to have a coach. You just start doing weird stuff.
And I think you're right. Like, sometimes I'll say to my athletes, like, if I was to offer you a value, for less money, would you take it? And so if we think about like aerobic capacity, right? If we can almost achieve the same exact thing at 65% versus 75%, but it's going to cost you less, right? The energy, like the amount of kilojoules that you're having to put out less, like that's a lot of food, right? Like that, I mean, I know you eat a lot, but like 20 watts, but like seriously, like
Owen
20
just called
watts.
Me fat.
But 20 watts over that amount of time, right? You're going, dude, I just eliminated X amount of calories that I've got to get home, and because you can't do it the next day, right? Like you're gonna run out of money or so
currency in the equation.
Right.
So I struggle with that. I even had an athlete who's a big rower. Shout out to Sam, who this past year came on board, and he said that same exact example to me because he was riding all of his endurance rides at 0.6, 0.62. And I said, hey, do you want to bump up the watts? And he said, well, I thought the whole goal was get as much as possible with the least cost. I'm like, it is, but he also wanted to do, what's that big gravel race? Unbound. And so I said, okay, but if you want to do unbound, we need to do some rides where you're pushing because you're not going to be doing 0.6 at unbound and having any chance of winning. And so we found a balance of some rides are harder. And I will always tell every athlete, I'm an athlete like you. Sure, I've been training with power longer than most of them. I've seen a lot of different scenarios, but I do not know everything. So if you feel like this is something that's working, and especially this dude's a crusher of a rower, huge pedigree in that. So full respect to somebody that's been killing in another sport. I want to hear what they have to say rather than tell him what to do. But I did say, hey, okay, I'm on board with that. Ride at that pace. Every once in a while, we got to push because his one limiter, big limiter, was didn't like going hard, didn't like doing VO2 max. And he quickly learned there's climbers with huge aerobic capacity still have to know how to sprint. And if you race the big boys, they don't roll into a climb. They're going to attack the crap out of the bottom and drop a lot of dead weight, recover a little bit, and then throw some punches. And it was actually really good to hear Alex Hone talking about that when he talks about people with their 20-minute power. He goes, man, people don't understand. We hit a climb and we might do 420 and then 360 and then 440 and then 330 and then 500. And then, like it's just, and people that don't see that and think it's just FTP have a very quick rude awakening. But digressing there. But I think I'm slowly coming over that camp. I used to be a kilojoule junkie though too. I really liked burning. Every ride was 275. If I averaged below 275 watts for a long endurance ride, I was thinking, okay, I'm a little tired. But now I'm thinking, damn,
and what is it? 278 or 278 watts is 1,000 kilojoules an hour.
It's just about 1,000 an hour, yeah.
So
that's how I rated it. 5 hours. Like, 5 hours had to be 5,000. If I did 5 hours and it was 4,600, I was like, damn, I need to ride another.
I'd be laying in a ditch. I'd be in the ditch on the side of the road, just like.
Probably the only reason I was good at gravel is I could just put out a massive amount of kilojoules. But yeah, I'm getting away from that. But it's also too now in thinking more about the racing that I'm doing. And back then, a lot of my racing was, and well, maybe it'll change now, being back on a squad where I was up the road at the gun. There were a lot of bike races where it was 3 hours and I would do 3,400 KJs, and that's what was needed to stay out the front. And you are just smashing. Sometimes I got caught a couple hours in, but my job was done. But it was like, hey, go and freaking make these people chase. And then when it was me and Patrick,
I'll be Jimmy this year.
Yeah, I love that dude is so aggressive. Love that he's so aggressive.
All right, I got my next question.
Okay.
How much do you use or follow the PCM performance management chart, or do you use another thing? Or I know we've already kind of talked about just checking in with the athlete and how do they feel.
Yeah.
But I just I've had an athlete. Shout out to Bobby.
What up, Bobby?
Yeah, I could tell you every time he was going to get sick. And I could look at his performance management chart, and man, when we would get below like, negative 40 TSB, I mean, he would just be, oh, I feel great, and he's flying, and then like 3 days later, he's like, oh man, I got a cold, or something. So, how much do you dive into that, and or are you finding like, hey man, I just really like checking in with them and stuff.
I use it way less than I used to. And I glance at it. I think in general, if you can get an athlete between 80 to 120 CTL, that's a good amount for most athletes that are working and stuff. I don't have a problem. I'm riding a ton. So because my CTL gets so high, my TSB doesn't really get that low. And the thing one time, this was back when we did tour of North Georgia, and I actually put a podcast out about this. The way that the numbers can get tangled up in that, it can be misleading as to, you can think if you're just going by numbers that you would need to train more and that you're not fresh and ready to go. And it was actually a perfect, I won't get into the whole thing because it was a podcast in itself and I'd be just grabbing the mic for too long, but I might post that link and people can watch if they're interested.
Okay.
The other thing is too, it confuses people when they see their CTL going down. They're like, I'm losing fitness.
Oh yeah.
You might
God.
be tapering. You might be freshening up. You might be shedding fatigue. So I think it's good man, it can be misleading. You can drive it up and then it depends how much somebody rests. And I think just checking in, and more so, I look at the frequency of workouts. I start to see red flags when 2 or 3 days are missed. That is when you are losing out big time. And the non-consistent athletes, you might as well just forget the PMC chart, because you're not consistent. You're not building on your fitness. You're just working out. You're Richard Simmons going to workout class. That's not a diss. That's just what it is. You're not changing your physiology. There's just consistency. Got to put in the reps. And
that makes sense. I do get obviously get athletes from other coaches and stuff like that, and that's one of the things I'll notice is like I'll look at that and it's just like this flattened line, and I'm like, dude, you haven't, you've been sitting at 80 for like 2 years. Like you haven't ever gone up or put any stress on you. And so that makes sense. Okay.
And that's the thing too. Some athletes, they never go hard enough, or I don't think everybody has to overload, but there should. Yeah. I think the flat is weird. If I get in season, sometimes it'll get flat if it's just like race, recover, and you're putting in big hours. And so I think that can be misleading too, because I definitely was more, I should go back and look at mine. It still has peaks and valleys, but yeah, it's the athletes that, and a lot of times they never take a rest week. That's more that I would look at. Like, are they even resting? I'm like, well, I only train 10 hours a week. I don't need to rest. I'm like, no, you definitely need to rest. Definitely need to rest.
Mine looks like a Tour de France Alpine stage.
There you go.
Dude, like when it's off, it's like
fully off.
Yeah, and when it's go, it's you take the last 4 years and you'd be like, what? This is like, it is a mountain stage at the Tour de France. Like,
it's interesting for me to look at mine when I moved to Tennessee, and that's when I started thinking I'm going to start doing just bigger miles because I wanted to. And so I was this, and I came up, and then I moved in the fall, and I just kept going up, and then it's been like this. It's just been mega miles, and it's worked out though. I had 7 years before that of a ton of riding, and somebody actually made a comment. I posted some video and they said, holy crap, man, you have a lot of 10,000 mile years. And I said, that's the only reason I can ride so much. I would be dead, but my body would crumble, and I'd probably still push it a little bit too much, but
cool. Learn. All right. What do you got on your end?
So what was my other question? I did not actually write it down, and it was the 65-75%. And man, what did I say the other night?
I didn't write it down either. So
Well, let me think of one. What's a good endurance question? I'm going to edit this part of the podcast out. Okay. Yeah, I remember that. So my other question was, and we touched on this briefly, but this might be, and you actually, was it Danielson that had you do the 130 BPM?
No, Jordan.
When did that make you start looking more at heart rate? Because a lot of questions will be, do you use heart rate for endurance or do you use power? And I always say, just use power, but don't kill yourself. And other people bring up aerobic decoupling, which is definitely a thing and something to be looked after. But I think one way to improve it is to ride more endurance. So I'm like, if you're not dead and you're not doing it all the time and you're never seeing an improvement, keep pedaling. If your heart rate goes up to 135, 138, okay, take note, make sure it doesn't keep getting higher, but it should start to get lower. How do you address heart rate in endurance riding?
Yeah, I think, This is a great question. I think there's a couple of different ways to come at it. I really enjoy, again, using the heart rate as an indicator of like improvement. So yeah, so say we give the athlete this range and it's 65 to 70%, and okay, go out and give me 2 hours and then 3 hours and then 4 hours and so on. Um, what is happening with the heart rate? And I feel like I heard a good podcast about this, but it basically talked about it went into like the aerobic decoupling of like you should see some improvements. We want to see the ultimate goal is to see less than a 10% takeoff over the second half of the ride versus the first half of the ride on that. And so that's kind of been my belief. But I guess how I coach it is, giving a power number, but then maybe giving a limiter on the heart rate. Right.
Cool.
I've seen guys, right, they're 5 hours in or 4 hours in and it's 95 degrees outside and they got it pegged at 230 watts, but their heart rate's above threshold, right? And you're just going, oh Lordy,
Guilty,
right?
guilty.
So I think almost the right way is and I learned this from my triathlon coach. And so I've got data from Training Peaks since 2009. So Coach Sean Burke, I was doing Augusta, a half Ironman, and he said, yeah, he goes, here's, we want you to try to hold 80% of FTP for the bike portion, and it was 2 hours and 15 minutes, 2 hour and 30-minute, bike portion, which is super achievable, but he goes, here's your heart rate limiter I want you to not go over. So he kind of gave me, now this is a race, right? But from that point on, I was like, man, that's probably a good, scenario to have. So, as I train, I kind of look at both. And then I guess it's really, what am I trying to achieve from a coaching standpoint is like, do I want to see how is this person's fitness improving, right? Like, and so the best way is to give them that flat line power number and then see what's happening with the heart rate. And ideally we don't want to see, they say like if you and I were going out and we were racing 3 hour road races, which is pretty normal for us, at like 3.5, we want to do 3.5 hours of zone 2 riding. We don't want to see more than a 10% drift. If when we get to that point where we don't have that, we're ready to go race that distance. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And that's just something I heard, and I couldn't tell you what podcast, and I apologize for ripping that off, but it was something I was like, yeah, that might just be a good thing to have and use.
It's interesting.
But like I can get athletes and hey, go out and do 2 hour ride, and in 2 hours their heart rate's taken off, right?
Yeah.
Where like you and I, like we know, like man, I can tell you usually, hey, at 3 hours it's going to start to go, but where you do a lot of training, I mean, you might be able to do 5 hours before it actually takes off.
Or I just ignore it and I let it go too high anyways.
Right.
A question, do you base the number, do you get that initial number just by first monitoring? So you give them the power number, hey, this is your zone 2, go ride at this. And then do you use that ride to establish the baseline number and then take 10% above that? Or where do you get the first number? And then my second question is, do you see a lot of variability? Because heart rate monitor sometimes either you drink too much coffee, you didn't sleep as well. Like sometimes there's variation just from that. How do you screen for those error readings? And I guess if you're looking at this very often, it's obvious when someone just is like off that day, but
right.
How do you get the baseline and then how do you screen for error?
Yeah, I think, for me, like, ideally, like the perfect template would be like, okay, send them out for a 3 hour ride. Take basically highlight or lap the first hour and a half, and then lap the second hour and a half, and then taking, the average of that, right? So just say, okay, the first hour and a half, the athlete was 130 beats per minute. And then the second half of that, the athlete was 140 beats per minute was their average.
Okay.
And it's tricky. Like Jacksonville's pretty awesome for it, and I think probably West Palm is probably pretty good too. But you can't do this. It's a tough thing to do because like think about it like, oh, there's a stoplight here and a stoplight there and a train crossing, and like I can go out the door and man just throw down consistent power for an hour and or 2.5 hours without really even stopping.
Wow. That's crazy.
So I can do that all day long. Like, and the worst thing is I just flip a U-turn and I can go back the other direction for an hour, and no stops, and it's just, so it's kind of cool with my athletes here because I can do that. I can say, hey, I want you to warm up to this park and then hop on A1A, and you can go on A1A, again, it's an hour one direction, an hour the other direction. And yeah, I can get constant data and feedback, but the only other place you can really get that is on the trainer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is something I'm going to implement this year is during the recovery weeks or adaptation weeks, I want to do a test and call it the aerobic test, and basically, get people on the trainer or get them on a road that they don't have to stop and do this, what we're talking about, because that's the problem, Brendan, is with what I'm saying here is like, well, great, like, what if the person stopped at the gas station for 15 minutes and then they hop back on their bike? Yeah, there's going to be some fluctuations and changes, or yeah, so it's tricky. It really is, man. I think the trainer in the perfect world is like, okay, I want you to do this once every 4 weeks on the trainer.
Less coffee stops, people. Less coffee stops. Since we're talking about endurance rides,
that's it. You do the coffee at the end.
Do the coffee at the end when you're 10 minutes from your house. Do not do it in the middle of the ride. You are wrecking so much of it.
Unless it's November,
Yeah, I guess, but still, put it at the end. Still tap into the high benefit, low cost. That's the theme of this: high benefit, low cost.
Right. So
what else? What other questions you got?
So this is kind of, I've got a couple athletes that are up north, and I think you probably do too, or have athletes in colder weather. What recommendations or tricks or secrets do you have for riding inside on an indoor trainer? Like I got people that are they're dying from boredom, and I think this is a question for anybody. So, if you have some secrets at the bottom, reply about
the comments.
In the comments on indoor trainer secrets.
So I'll have to give the context again, because I've actually gotten some messages that say, hey, you guys used to sponsor this Zwift team, but you don't seem to Zwift. What's the deal with that? And I was like, because I lived in upstate New York and I rode on a trainer when it was just dumb trainers, and it broke me. It is hard. And so the only answer to that was losing the year before and thinking, I'm going to crush that person this year. And there was no doubt in the Northeast who rode in the basement and who didn't. And in April, May, and early June, it was killing season on the people that didn't do it. And there was I remember coming down, if you live in the Southeast, if you live in warmer weather, you have such an advantage. And I remember the first time I did nationals in Augusta, there were a lot of guys I had never seen, a lot of teams I had never seen. They just seemed on a higher level. Now, granted, Bike Reg won that year and they were from the Pennsylvania area, but that was a little bit more moderate. It still get winter. I don't want PA people to be like, we have crazy winter. Well, you do. Upstate New York, though, near Canada, it's a different beast. And it was a lot of indoor time. And so it's literally how badly do you want it? Plain and simple. And there are a lot of soft athletes out there. And I'm sorry to put that out there, but I just want people to recognize, be honest with yourself, because so much of endurance sports is how much are you willing to put into it. And I'm not saying you have to give up your life. I'm not saying you have to be a bike monk. I'm not saying that you can't do other things, but I'm saying if you cannot ride 2 hours on a trainer, it's going to be tough if you live in a cold area. Now, you could, I was doing longer rides on the trainer. I was doing 3-hour rides. I had done a 4-hour ride. That was because it was on the weekend and it would blizzard and there was no going outside. And I really just didn't have a choice. But indoors, I'm with you. If you don't want to ride 2 hours during the week, I get that. It's dark. There's Zwift now, though. I would suck it up and do it. You can get by with an hour and a half if you've been riding a while. I did 1.5-hour sessions on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then I said I'm riding 4 to 5 hours on Saturday and Sunday, no matter what. And we would all start watching the weather on Wednesday, and it was either, oh, it's going to be a good weekend, and you had to have dry roads also, so it couldn't even rain or else it was going to be icy. Friday, if it got nasty, it was people were in bad moods. I was like, oh my god. Oh,
so you're saying it's kind of like Rocky. You gotta put the picture of the Russian up on the.
If you can't ride inside for 3 hours, you're not gonna beat me. I'm gonna put that out there right now.
Oh man.
No, that's it. It's just really, I mean, it's endurance sports. You got to do the work, and there's no way around it. And you can. Somebody actually asked a really good question in the Discord. Hey, can I do higher intensity and then switch to volume later? You could. The only problem is a lot of people do higher intensity and then they're actually working way too much. It's hard to maintain that. So I would ask the question, what are you going to do? What's high intensity? VO2 max work, you're going to most likely burn out unless you're some sort of freak that can just go in the cave all the time and crush. But I don't really think that's effective. We're working such a high intensity for cardiac output. You're not working on the actual portion in your cells that's going to make the energy. You want that endurance. I think you could do some FTP stuff, but I would even then say switch to variety, do the cadence work, do the endurance work, do a little bit of tempo work, change it up so your brain has different stimulus. 100%. I don't think you want to be crushing all winter. I haven't seen that work well. I'm sure there's somebody out there that's what they do and they love it. I have more seen the flip side. Zwift came out. There's a ton of racing. People race. They feel really fit. Then they go do a 3-hour road race. It's not so pretty. And that's, there's more of that story. I'll leave it at that.
Sure.
You just got to be a badass. You just have to want it. And that's the thing. I don't feel like I was being a badass. It was just I had no other option. Being a badass was changing my life and moving south. That's what I'm more proud of saying. My dad actually said that to me. He said, "Why do you still live here?" I said, "What?" And he's like, "You love riding a bike. You have 3 nice months. It has snowed here in May. It gets really crappy in October. When are you going to move?" And then I started talking about moving to North Carolina before I moved to Tennessee, where my sister lives. And he said, this is probably, 8 months later. He said, "Hey, so you're just going to talk about moving? You're actually going to do it?" And I was like, damn, I feel like you don't want me around here. He's like, no, but I just see how much you love this and you need to probably do more of it, but you're not going to be able to do it here.
Right.
And that's when I just put the wheels in motion. Like, okay, I need to follow this thing. And so glad I did. But it's so I'm more kidding. It's not hard ass. It's just if you want it, you'll figure it out. Athletes will find a way. And so I usually leave it to the athlete. And so I'm getting super verbose here, but I am passionate about this topic because people want a shortcut. People want a sweet spot for an hour and think they're going to crush. It's not going to happen. That's not how this works. And so I will give athletes the option. Hey, you can ride an hour and a half. We can do this. Let's try and change things up. And sometimes people just start skipping workouts and I can't put them on the trainer. So I'll offer other like, let's go outside. Can you ski? That's a big thing. My problem with that is though, then I had to drive to ski. There just wasn't enough time all the time during the week. It gets dark at 4:30. It's like, ugh. So I that could be a podcast in itself. How to keep it rolling, I think everybody should just move south though. So
Yeah.
uh,
Hey,
what do
Jacksonville's
you
a place, man. I'm telling you guys, if you wanna get, I think it's one of the best training areas in the country,
I
man.
gotta get up there?
We can go just about every direction but east. So
What are you telling people?
yeah, I think you nailed it, to be honest. It's just, what is the want? And I get it. It's crazy because, I I last year I hopped on the trainer twice. I made it 42 minutes the first time, and I made it 48 minutes the second time, and I sold that trainer, And so
Had you just bought it? Was that your first trainer?
it was, no, I've done this multiple times, man. I mean, when I was working with, like, I used to have the old CompuTrainer back in the day,
Oh wow.
but I can knock out high intense intervals, right? Like if you sent me in I used to be in the garage and it would be like 4 by 8 minutes. I remember that day you gave me 4 by 8 minutes and you're like, do them at 105%. I was like, you're crazy. That was the most pain I've ever suffered in my life. But, I was like,
It's my bread and butter, dog.
I know. And I was like, dang, but he's going to look at these numbers. And like, I was fit at the time. And I was like, I got to knock these out, And I mean, it was just like getting to 6 minutes. And then I was like, all right, I can make it two. But yeah, so I could do the high intense stuff. But like, literally, if I got on the trainer and I just, pre programmed 220 watts, I'd cover all the stuff with a towel, and had my music in and just, and I finally, I just look up and I hit stop and I'm like, 42 minutes. Are you kidding me? It's been like, feels like 2 hours,
Dude,
And
horrible. And that's
so
what
yeah, I have nothing for anybody.
it's the so my last so I officially so I moved in 2016. I actually was planning to move in 2014 and I was on a winter ride on a fixed gear and I passed a sign. I ended up winning a scholarship to get my MBA and I was like, "Uh-oh, I'm staying here 2 more years." And in that second year, I cracked and I I so sick of the snow, so sick of winter, pumping gas where you can't feel your hands. And that year, the only indoor rides I did, I don't even think I know I did have a trainer, but I think it was on its last legs. I had rollers though. I was much more a fan of rollers. I did 4x10s all the time, either
Mhm.
tempo 4x10s, threshold 4x10s, where I was nearly like flying off the rollers, or I would try to mess with the cadence a little bit. And just the roller action kept me alive. And the reason I was in Battenkill and I got dropped on the last climb by Brian Lewis, I believe, who
Oh
raced
yeah.
for what's the name of the team? Lupus, I think, after, and someone else.
Yeah, Kelly Benefits. I think he's
Yeah,
running with
man,
everybody.
I was cramped. I just didn't have the miles in. I didn't do it. I didn't want it. And
And
guess
he's
what?
strong.
He's strong, but I wanted to at least give it a shot. And
Yeah.
I was off the front. I was falling apart. And I went back to my car and I stood on that podium and I was really bummed because just didn't do the work. And I
Right.
had put myself in that position. And that's the only reason I want to tell people you're going to put in this time. Sometimes it's a little hard. Sometimes you don't want to do it. I think I love riding. I'm a cyclist before a bike racer by far. If I never raced again, no problem. I'm getting excited to go do some Grand Fondos with the guys in Slovenia. That excites me. Riding in different places, love it. But I don't want to ride all the time. And there are days when I get up and I would much rather just drink some coffee and chill out and let's go to breakfast and da da. But somebody else is going to do that and I'm going to get better. So I'm going to go do that. And then I'll have the coffee, and you just got to pick and choose every day.
Yeah.
I picked a sport where consistency is king. If you don't like
Yeah.
that, you need to play a skills game.
Yeah.
And
And that's one of my juniors said that we were on a ride Sunday, and he goes, "You know what I like about cycling?" And he goes, "You reap like what you put in." You work hard, like you get better." He's like, "It's and in this, he's gone from 220 watt FTP to 300 watt FTP in one year, and he's just a young guy, he's just like, dude, this is awesome. You could feel the fire, man. Like I'm like, okay, let's go.
And it's crazy because I look back at every Cat 1 that I looked up to when I was a Cat 5, and I just thought that would be so sick to be in that race. I would love to race against those people. And you don't think that guy was just where I was. Just he got into this before me. And at some point, Owen Schott was in a fluoro jersey looking like he didn't know how to stand on a bike. And guess what? I was there too. And I had the Nash bar this and I had that. And I mean, there's some pictures on Instagram floating around that people love to laugh. And I love it. I put one out that I said, like, circle all the whackness. And just like you circle the entire thing from just look. You don't look like you look now. That's for sure. And it's a journey. And I think any journey where you want to find success, you want to find happiness, it's going to take a little bit of grit and a little bit of, I'm going to push through this. And it's not and I don't say that in the macho push through, like only train hard. It's definitely not that. It's train smart, but just be consistent with it. And there's going to be days and things you got to navigate. And Todd Shesky, actually, a guy from my cycling club, he was one of my first nemesis that I really wanted to beat this guy because he was one of the OG guys. He coaches who's Estevez, is it? Who won the road race?
Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, Daniel.
Estevez, yeah.
And Todd just had an article in Peaks Coaching, and it was something to the effect of, we make a plan, and then life happens, weather happens, injuries happen, all these other things happen, and champions find a way to win. And so I thought that was I actually need to shoot him an email and just say, hey, I read that quote, and could not be more spot on. And the more I'm in forums, I talk a lot, I post a lot of stuff, I probably read a lot more. I just like to sneak in and see what people are chatting about. And then there is so much of how can I get more with getting less, which I guess that's kind of working smart, but there's not this, I want to work for it. It's, I want to get it, but I want to do it in 45 minutes. And endurance sports, just, you can't change the physiology that way, unfortunately, unless you cheat and not really into that game. So
yeah. Well, I got one last question for you,
cool.
And then this is more for me, I think, than anything. Is so we're kind of in the same boat, right? Both defending champions. We've both won, championship title before. What is the motivating factor for you going into 2022? I kind of, I don't want to struggle with this, but it's one of those things that you kind of been there and done that. And I know there's some other higher bars, right? But what is your motivating factor for 2022 to do it again, or to get on that bike every day, like you're saying?
Yeah, I think the big one is not again. I've never been on a team that's won amateur nationals, so being able to see one of us win that race. I think last year was the only year in 13 years as a Cat 1, is it, since 2010? So no, 11 years as a Cat 1, that I thought, oh man, this could maybe happen. I could maybe have a shot right now. We got caught, but it was a nice glimmer, and to still be there. I'm thinking, okay, maybe next year. And then you had hit me up of maybe we'll do these masters races. And then next thing I know, it's this powerhouse P1 team. And the reason I said yes instantly was I think we could win nationals. And then I think also the driving force is just personal development. I actually think I'm hungrier now than I ever was before, because I sort of know where I am in racing. Before it was confusing. You first get your Cat 1. Local people don't. There's usually not a lot of Cat 1s, so people don't know the levels of pro. People are like, "When you going pro?" And I'm like, "I'm not good enough to go pro." And then other people,
right.
Some people are telling me you need to go, all across the U.S. and do all these NRC races, which it used to be called. Now I was 27, and that from like 27 to 30, I was trying to just find my footing of where is racing in my life, and now I know where it is, how much I want to ride, what types of races I want to go do. I still want to try new things, like trying the gravel. I'm sort of getting out of that. It's just not, it's great. just not for me as much. I'll do some gravel, but it's not going to be a high focus. And I think just trying to win races that I haven't won before. Went and did Carter County. That's a race that I probably should never be able to win, which makes me super excited to try and win it. Like, okay, how can I beat these guys up this freaking 3-mile climb? There's a way, and a lot of things have to align, but there's a way. And I think different challenges, doing the Gran Fondo Nationals, which some people laugh. They're like, are you seriously going to do a Gran Fondo? I'm like, well, it's segment racing. I've never done this before. Awesome. I probably will never win. Owen's not coming, so maybe I have a shot at the age group. And, I come in 6th overall. So riding behind some guys that are just absolute phenomenal climbers, that still feels good to me. It's like, okay, that was kind of cool. And, went, and it's just having a good time.
It's 4 races in one, man. It's kind of like,
well, we did not take, I don't know if I ever told you, we did not take your strategy, which is the smart one. Everyone's riding literally, as you said, Brendan, this is not going to be a 5-hour ride. People ride slowly to the segments. Patrick's wife, Asaka, was there with their kid, Kaito. Chris was there. We didn't plan for this to be a 6.5-hour day. So I said to Patrick, I'm like, we're taking off, man. We just got to ride this thing. So 2 guys came with us. The 4 of us ripped the whole course. And wow. I think the only reason I won by 33 seconds against the next Masters guy. Yeah. And the only thing I can think of that happened is there's 2 of those KOMs that are long stretches that finish with a climb.
Yep.
The 4 of us went full gas the entire time. So even though we maybe were a little tired on the climb, I think we would have gained time on the flats, because there's no way 8 guys are going to all give it their all, right, knowing they have to then climb. So I say, guys, if we just average higher early on, I think that's going to benefit us versus these climbers behind us. So I don't know. It was a different strategy. We got done in way before the other group. And so first to the pizza. That's what was the most important. Yeah. But yeah, man, I think motivation, having fun. I love the sport. Man, I've met some amazing friends through cycling and going to these events. And I think the biggest thing is it's really easy I used to be so intimidated at races, and I don't know when it changed more, but once I started realizing we're all on the start line with a little bit of a hard shell up, because we're all looking around like, damn, that dude looks fast. That dude looks fast. Damn, I want to win today. Da-da-da. But then you're like, hey, man, what's up? That's literally all you have to say. And they're like, oh, man, this guy's actually nice. Hey, what's up? Who are you? Where? Da-da-da. And really, I think it probably started more when I moved to Nashville. Like, we went, I think, immediately. I have told this story. When I beat you at Masters Nationals, which was, man, I was so worried about you. The very first person to come up and give me a hug was you. And I was like, this dude is pure class. Like, we just went to battle and you were so happy for me. And I was like, man, this is such a, that's a winner right there. And just meeting people like that, you want to surround yourself with good people. So it's,
that's a lot of self-work though. I mean, that, I can tell you 100 stories, but the previous generation of me, or I would have probably went and did another lap, of the course and just been MIA, and that is something that I had worked on, and just understanding, and I was super happy for you at that time too, and I had to kind of put aside what I was feeling and go, like, this guy just, worked really hard for this. And if I lose to him, like, it's, like, okay, and I knew the next year, like, I got to work harder, and it's kind of neat. A lot of people don't know, but, you and I have taken, 3 out of the 4 races, Masters National Championships that we've been in, or, raced together in. And I think we're pushing the bar up for each other, because you thought you were going to walk in 2017 and just clean house, and
dude, I thought for sure.
I was like, and then 18, you knew you had to work harder, and then 19, I came back and I was like, man, I got to work harder than him. And I was like, I went out 3 weeks early in Colorado Springs. I was like, I got to get every advantage I can. It's 5% if I'm out there 3 weeks early. I knew exactly. It was 22 days I needed to be out there early. I knew, and then, I think in 20, I was like, you probably would have, I was okay, but I think you probably would have cleaned me in 20, but we didn't have
We didn't
nationals.
have
And so,
it. I was ready, man. I
oh,
was,
yeah, I knew you were. Cause
and I
yeah,
realized you dedicate, I realized how dedicated you were when you went out there so early. And that was a great learning lesson for me. I got there 3 days before and did not feel good. The altitude really hurt me. And then when I was talking to you for Albuquerque, Chris flew. Somehow we messed up the dates, and he said, "Okay, I'll see you on Wednesday." I said, "No, man, I'm coming in Thursday." And he's like, "Well, do you want us to come in early?" I'm like, "I cannot." The third day, it smacks me like a ton of bricks. I got there, raced, and then I stayed a few days afterwards. And that third day, I was like, "Oh man, I don't feel that great," and it was just headache, kind of just off. And I rode that day, wasn't feeling amazing. So anyway, but I'm in the same boat. There's a picture of me. I learned a really good lesson. My teammate made some tactical errors. There was a state championship that I really wanted to win in New York, and it was a memorial race for a guy from our club. And I ended up coming in third, and I looked like a smug little baby on the podium. And I felt bad because that's just a poor sport. And I lost like a loser. And you have to be a gracious loser. And it was a really good lesson because every once in a while I see that picture and I was like, I don't want to be that person. And so, it takes, sometimes you just got to go through that to realize that's not the way to carry yourself. And that's the awesome thing about, I think people lose track that we've picked a hobby that is really difficult. Any Nordic skiers, talk to serious runners, marathoners, ultras, whatever. Talk to rowers. They get up crazy early. Like, we're doing something where we want to excel outside of work. And we're both blessed to be coaches. And so riding kind of is part of work. But, it's hard. And we want to find success in this. And that's why little wins need to be celebrated, because it is so difficult. And there's just, most athletes are juggling a lot of different things, and it's easy to forget that and only see the other person winning. And that should just be motivating, Right. I think best buddies, that's a motivation. Guys like Legion, look, those are phenomenal teams. My motivation is, I would love if people and damn, that Velobrew team, they're pretty damn good too, right. So it's just keep going to bat. And maybe we go and maybe we get totally squashed and maybe we're not in those guys' league. But guess what? We're going to give them a run for the money. That's for sure.
For sure. So, cool. Well, I appreciate it, man.
Man, this is awesome.
This is fun. So
yeah, really good questions.
If anybody else wants to, if they enjoyed this or like this, and want to hear us talk about other war stories or any other types of training, definitely hit Brendan up. And
they do.
I'd love to have a podcast of champions, or something like that. So
yes, keep it rolling. We'll put for people that don't know about the Discord, it is sort of like a Slack. It is basically a forum that has a bunch of different threads on different topics. There are right now 300 athletes from around the world. So you will get very different opinions, which goes to our Cadence talk. No one's right. There's no one in there flexing. There's actually no flexing allowed. And it is an awesome group of people that I really like reading the questions and the answers that people come up with. And I comment a lot because I'm just like to throw in my 2 cents, but it's very, very different backgrounds and experience. And I think it keeps it really fresh. So we'll post that. Everybody should join. And that's all I got, man.
Perfect, dude. Well, I appreciate your time, and I'll catch up with you sooner than later.
Yes. All right. Owen,
all right, buddy.
Take care. Bye.